Well, good morning, hope you're all doing well. So today, no fancy intros, no nothing like that. I want to get straight into it and discuss how I see a shot and how I work on it from start to finish. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to a location, look at how I'm going to set up for a photograph, look at what I look for. Then we're going to go back to the office and I'm going to go through the whole processing thing as well. Not going to spend too long on the processing and just kind of show you how I would tackle this. But we're going to get to the location, have a look around, and then I'll show you how I'm going to set things up. So first of all, as you can see, we're at this beautiful location, which is this beautiful bridge, this little viaduct that goes across with the river running through it. So what am I looking for? Well, it's about choosing the right position to photograph first of all. So what I can tell from here, looking at it from this point of view where I am now, is that I think what I'm going to have to do is photograph it further across into the river. And the reason for that is, if you look behind me here, there's no water running at all behind me. So all the points of interest are further over in that direction. So that's what I want to pick up on with the camera, because obviously you want something going on in the frame. So that's going to be my point of interest, my first sort of focal point of the image is the actual water running through, and then the bridge is kind of secondary to that. So what I'm going to have to do, I think, is position myself further across, more into the sort of middle of the river. And to do that, obviously, best thing to do is to wear a good pair of wellies and get yourself into the middle of the river, because it's so easy to go to a location and take a shot from the side of a riverbank or something like that, but you never really get that unique perspective. So make sure you get something like a decent pair of wellies, a good pair of waders, some water shoes, and the ability to get right into the middle of the river, as long as it's safe to do so, not put yourself at risk, and get yourself that sort of focal point that, or perspective more, that people don't actually get to see all the time, because that's what you're looking for, is a perspective that the everyday person doesn't get to see, and that's what will make your image stand out from the rest. So first of all, I think we're going to have a look further across there and see what the view looks like from the other side there. Now the next part of the process is to get your camera in hand and walk around and see what's going to work the best. And from this position here, what I've worked out is I need to be a little bit further across, and actually two things. So usually my go-to lens is the 35-70 on my system, and actually 35 isn't quite wide enough because I'm quite close to this bridge here. So the first thing I had to do is swap over onto the wide-angle lens, 23mm, so I can get as much of this scene in as possible, because I'm quite close. And the reason for it is, this is the only real place where I can get a good location to photograph it from, because this is the only sort of dry area I can get to. So what I'm going to do is position myself a little bit further across, as far as I can get, pick the camera up again, and then I can kind of frame it up as to where I want it. And looking from here, I can frame it up quite nicely here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you to the back of the camera and actually show you how I'm going to frame it. But it's definitely a better position, because you're getting more of these rapids in that are coming down here. I think it's a fish ladder actually. And then you've got a bit more of the water cascading over here. Obviously, as I said at the start, there's nothing much happening over that direction, but what I want to happen is get the bridge in from left to right in the frame. So wide angle lens, 23mm, I'll get the tripod set up, and then I'll get you to the back of the camera, and then I'll walk you through what I'm looking at here. So now we're set up in the area I want to be in. The next consideration is what I want to keep in the frame and what I want to eliminate in the frame. And by doing that, that also makes me sort of choose which aspect ratio I want to use, because it means that I can eliminate certain things from the frame by using different crop modes in camera. So what I'll do is press record on the back of here now, and what you'll see is I've set it up as a 16:9, and there's a few reasons for that. If I go into my crop modes now, and I go to 4:3, now what you'll see is I've got a larger expanse of water at the lower section of the frame, and then I've got the bridge running through from kind of just below the top of the frame there, probably about, you know, a good chunk of sky off to that sort of left to right. But what I actually want to do is frame it in a way where I've got the top of that bridge, top left corner, I want in the corner of the frame, so that it kind of leads you from that left side of the frame down towards the right with the angle of the bridge. Also including those waterfalls in the bottom there. So if I go back to my crop modes and I go into a 16:9, you'll see it eliminates a lot of that water from the lower section of the frame, so there's not too much water now, because although it's nice to see the water, it's kind of a dark brown water. There's nothing particularly interesting about it. You're getting quite a bit of glare from the sky, so I want to eliminate a bit of that if I can. Obviously it's quite churny, it's quite disturbed water, so you're not going to get reflections because it's not calm enough. So with that in mind, I want to eliminate as much of it as possible, because it's really not that interesting. So in order to get the bridge in the top left corner there, the 16:9 format works really, really well. I'll just check through here now. Yeah, so I've got it right bang on in the top corner there. And then it's just a question of moving your frame around to get in what you want to keep. Now obviously I'm not going to get the full expanse of the bridge, but what I'm doing is moving it left and right in little subtle adjustments. If you watch now, if I move it across towards the right a little, I start to get those rocks coming in just on the right there. There you go, you'll just see them now. So what I want to do is try and get that out of frame, because it's quite distracted just right on the edge of the frame. So I'm going to bring it back and eliminate it. I want to keep that other rock, which is just off to the right of the frame there, but because it's in from the edge, it's not distracting to my eye. So it just adds a little bit of a point of interest. So I'll just frame that up again. And if I go too far towards the right, you'll see I start to lose a bit of that right side of the bridge, and I also start to get in water safety buoys and stuff like that, safety rings. So I want to avoid that if possible. So just line that back up now. So what I want to do is get as much of that last arch on the right hand side as possible without getting the edge of that rock in. There we go, I'm just going to lock it off there. And that's how I want to frame up my shot. So, next consideration here is basically, am I going to need filters? Well, you can tell it's kind of an overcast day, so I want to retain a bit of that detail and texture in that water, because obviously that's my main focal point. So yes, I'm going to need filters. The other thing I'm going to need them for is to kind of reduce the amount of glare that I've got on that water. So what I'll probably do is I'll start off with a three-stop ND with a polarizer combined. I'll just pop that up on now, and then we'll see. Yeah, you can see that it really takes that glare off the water when I turn that. You see that? So that's great at that. Now what I need to think about now is what kind of shutter speed am I looking for. So as you can see, I'm ISO 100. So I want about 1/4 of a second, somewhere like that on the water. I always start off around about 1/4 of a second, then I can kind of go over, under, whatever it's going to be. So I'm going to grab a shot at that first. 2-second timer. So the water is perfect at about 1/4 of a second for my tastes anyway. So the next thing I want to consider is, do I want to smooth out the rest of the water surface below that the actual the waterfalls themselves. And I think I actually do. So what I'm going to try is I'm going to take that filter off now, pop it off, and then I'm going to try a 6-stop with the polarizer as well. And again, I'm just going to turn it to get rid of the glare off the water. And as you can see, that really drags the shutter down, and it means I can get around about, if I go for about 2.5-3 seconds, something like that, that should smooth out that water enough just to kind of get rid of the kind of jarring details in the water. And what I'll end up doing in post, which you'll see, is I'll take all of these images that I'm taking and I'll just basically paint in the bits that I want to keep. So I want that 1/4 second for the waterfalls, but I also want 2 to 3 seconds for the rest of this water below that, just to smooth it out. So I'm going to grab that shot again now, 2-second timer, take the shot. So with the first shot, with the 1/4 second exposure for the water, for the little waterfalls there, I replayed it back on the screen to make sure that there was enough detail left in the sky, because what I usually like, or usually prefer in my images, is to keep as much texture and detail in the sky as possible. So what I tend to do is remove all filters in that case and take a shot just for the sky, just so that there's no movement there, and freeze the action, because I like all that detail back in that sky area. And obviously you've got quite a bit of sky above the bridge, and you've also got quite a bit of sky in between each of the arches of the bridge, so I want to keep that as much as possible. So this is the way I work out on field. It's always a matter of getting as much of this information as possible to work with back when I get back home, basically. I don't want to miss out on any details, so it's very much a case of getting all these different shots to make sure that I've got everything to work with. That doesn't kind of make up for the lights. You've still got to wait around and get the best of the light, but that is the process that I generally use, especially if there's water involved or anything like that. So hopefully that's walked you through my process and my way of thinking when I'm out on field taking a shot.
So now we're back in the office, and as you can see, I've brought up these images here. Now we're going to start with the first one, which was the 1/4 second image that I took for the water. And all I'm going to do with these is, to start with, I'm just going to click on auto. And it's just a base point I always use just to see how it handles it, and usually it just lifts everything enough just to work with. So I'll do that with both the images. So the next one is the 3-second image. Let's pop that on auto as well. Now what I usually do from that point on is make sure that I don't like any of the color profiles that my camera gives me. So I usually go into the color profiles, make sure, and just cycle through a couple of them to see if there's any that I really like. I usually go with Audiio Soft or Classic Chrome, something like that, because it just does a really nice job. So Audiio Soft just gives those colours a little bit more of a pop again, so I'll probably select that. And then I'll do the same on the other image, because I want them to be the same, because obviously I'm working with both files to combine into one. So select Audiio on that one as well, or Audiio, whichever you prefer. Next thing I will do from that point on is I'm going to take them into Photoshop and blend them. So basically what I want to do here is select both images, so shift and click so I can select both images. Then I'm going to edit in and open as layers in Photoshop. So now it's opened up in Photoshop. First thing we need to do is select both images again. So shift and click to select both those images, then go into edit and auto align layers. Now hopefully I didn't move, but you do get subtle moves sometimes that there's nothing you can do about. So this is just double checking and making sure that both images line up. And that's fine there. So the next thing we need to do then is, obviously what I've got here is the 1/4 of a second image on top. So what I'm going to do is select a mask, click on that icon there, and then make sure I've got a black mask there so I can paint through. Select my brush icon, and then I usually set it to about 50% the opacity, somewhere like that. And just reduce my brush size slightly. And then all we're going to do, in fact I'm going to increase the brush size because I want to bring up this water here, not the waterfalls itself, because what I've done is I've basically put the layer underneath that I want to bring through. So that's going to be the slower shutter speed, because I've kept the faster shutter speed here for the clouds and for the water. So I'm just going to start to paint in the slower shutter speed through there. You can see that water's just starting to smooth out a little now, and it'll start to appear on that little mask there. So we'll just start painting all of that in. And you can see it's just getting rid of that sort of jarring effect that the streams have on the water there. Now what I tend to do in my workflow as well is I've got this little plugin, and it's Pro Panel plugin that I use. So I just click on that, and what I always do is see what the colour's doing. Sometimes you get colour casts, and it's nothing to do with the filters or anything like that. It can just be ambient light that's causing it. So I always try this with my images just to make sure there's no sort of colour casts there. So click on Auto Colour, and that's done not a bad job at all there. And the other thing I tend to do as well is just to kind of lift the whole image, and I use Lux to do that. So I click on Lux, and that just gives it that little pop. And there we go. That's a good basis to work from. So what I'll do now is File, Save, and that will save back to Lightroom, where we can do the rest of the edits. So now we've taken it back into Lightroom again, I can start doing my other edits. Now the first thing I'm going to do is select a mask for the sky. There we go, just make sure it's selected everywhere, and it has really nicely there. So now I can deselect that. Now what I tend to do with my skies is, if you bring the exposure down, you can kind of see that it makes quite a huge difference. So I don't tend to do that too much. What I'll tend to do is, if I'm going to do any with the exposure on the sky, I'll just bring it down a subtle amount, so about -10 at most, because you don't want to make it too obvious that's what you've done. But what I will do is I'll adjust the blacks in an image. So if you reduce the blacks on the sky, you can see it starts to bring that detail back in the darker areas of the sky there, just by adjusting the blacks. And I think that works far better. So if I just bring that down to -22, you can see that I've got a lot more detail back. So the next thing I'll do is come down to my clarity and my texture. Now you don't want to add too much of this, because obviously it can make your skies look really weird, but the textures I tend to play with just a touch. Now you can just see really subtly, if I take that up to about 25 there, it's just brought that texture and detail back to the clouds there. And that's pretty much all I'll do with that, and just leave that alone. There we go. So that's just brought that detail back to the clouds, I feel. So the next thing I'll do is, if I just select another mask now, and I'm going to select a linear gradient, just for down here, and I'm going to make sure I turn that around because I want to affect the bit below. There we go. Now I don't want to affect the waterfalls, I just want to affect the water itself down here. So what I'll tend to do is just adjust the whites slightly on here, just to lift the lower section of the frame there. You see what's happening? So if I lift that up, just lifting the whites enough there, somewhere to about 50, somewhere around there. And then I'll leave that there. Now that's just kind of made that lower section of the image just pop a little bit more. And lastly, probably what I would do with this image is I would get another mask and select a brush this time. And what I'm going to do is just adjust the whites. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to paint on a mask for the bridge itself. Now you could use select subject for this. I quite like selecting the sections that I want to use myself. So it's not vital you hit everywhere, because I'm not going to do like a really drastic adjustment here. I just want to kind of lift the bridge a touch to make it pop a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now is just adjust the whites on the bridge. And you can see if I just go to about 28, somewhere like that, it's probably enough. And the other thing I shall do is just lift the blacks a touch, just to get rid of any really dark spots. Now you see that black area is gone. And it kind of gives it a bit more of a grittier feel to it as well. And it just makes that bridge pop really nicely. The final thing to do is take this into Luminar to get rid of these power lines. Now if I just zoom in, you'll see them just there. So you could probably use the clone tool, no problem, but I know this plugin works really well for this, so I'm just going to go and edit in Luminar Neo, edit with Lightroom adjustments, and wait for it to load up. And once this is loaded, we need to go to the edit module. It's still doing something. Go to the edit module, and we need to go to erase and remove power lines. One click. And hopefully that should take most of it out. There we go. If I just zoom into that there you go, gone. So that's that, apply. So that's us pretty much done with the image, and that's where I'm going to leave it really. That's as good as I'm going to get it. Now obviously the light wasn't fantastic, but that's the best I can kind of make of this image, and that's my process for walking through and editing an image once I've finished. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week's video. Like and subscribe if you have, and I'll see you on the next video soon. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. Bye bye.